Welcome to Brew Builds, your place for DIY home improvements. I'm Paul. Today, I'll start building the structure for the fireplace and this barbecue in our backyard. You ready? Let's build this. I'm using metal studs to build a fireplace and barbecue structure. The advantage of using this over wood is metal can't rot and it is fireproof. I haven't built that much using metal framing, so this is going to be somewhat of a learning curve for me. Tools and items needed: metal studs and track, metal stud screws, concrete anchors and drill bit, a tape measure, a level, a screw gun drill driver, an impact driver, a hammer drill, a chop saw, a sawzall, tin snips, a utility knife, a carpenter square, a speed square, gloves, and your personal safety gear. The first thing you need to know about metal framing is it comes in different thicknesses or gauges. The second thing would be that there is a stud and that there's a track. In a typical wall, the track will go at the bottom and the top of the wall. And then the stud fits inside the track, held together with screws. The third thing would be that this stuff can be pretty sharp, so you want to wear gloves. Alright, let's go up to my computer and I'll show you the metal structure I'll be building for the fireplace and barbecue. On the Brew scale, technical ability I rate as an expert. All the measuring, calculating, cutting, and attaching needs to be correct. Physical ability I rate as difficult. Nothing is that heavy, but you will be using a lot of screws. I've designed the framing of the fireplace and barbecue structure in 3 sections. There's the barbecue area, and then the seating area with the fireplace on top of that. Framing with metal is a little bit different than framing with wood, especially when it comes to headers and the top plate. I was able to find some technical details online that helped me with the design and redesign of the framing. I know this is just a fireplace and an outdoor kitchen, but I do want it to be structurally sound. The barbecue does have some weight to it, and I need it strong enough to be able to support some concrete countertops. I was going to build the fireplace section and lower seating section together as one unit, but then I decided it would be better to build the lower section first and then place the fireplace section on top of that. So I'm going to make myself a cut list so I can start cutting some metal studs. I have a lot of cutting to do. There are a few different options for cutting metal framing. A chop saw is the fastest, but it is noisy and messy. Tin snips are a good way. You don't get the noise and fumes like a chop saw, but they do take more time, and if you have a lot of cuts to do, your hands will start to get tired. A third way would be a reciprocating saw. Faster than the tin snips, noisy like the chop saw, but you don't get the fumes. However, you do end up with a lot of little metal shavings everywhere. So I'm going to start cutting some of this metal framing using all 3 of these methods. Using a chop saw with a carbon blade not only makes spectacular camera shots, but it also makes it easy to cut multiple studs at a time. To help the cutting go quicker, I've marked on the studs the length of the pieces I need to cut as well as the quantity. For example, 3 of the 10-foot studs will be cut into these lengths. I need 45 of the 14.5-inch studs. Instead of marking the stud, I found it quicker to use a stud already cut at that length to measure with. I was able to cut 8 studs at one time with this chop saw. If you don't have a chop saw, you can use a reciprocating saw or a sawzall. Using a blade with 18 teeth per inch works better than a blade with larger teeth. Measure the length you need to cut and use a speed square to mark the 3 sides of the stud. Doing 2 studs at a time not only will make the cutting go twice as fast, but it will also keep the blade from wandering as much and give you a straighter cut. Start cutting at one of the corners first, keeping the blade at a 45-degree angle. Be sure to keep the blade on both the top and side lines of the stud. Be careful that the blade doesn't jump out. Like that. Using a longer blade can prevent this. Use a metal file to remove any burrs or sharp edges. Another way to cut just one stud is to cut the 2 sides of the stud starting at the open end. You will need a longer blade for this. Once the 2 sides are cut, score the surface of the stud so you can bend and break it off. Which leads me to cutting a stud with tin snips. Mark both sides of the stud and cut on the line with a pair of tin snips. Then take a speed square and line up the 2 cuts, then score the stud with a utility knife. Then bend the stud back and forth and the stud will snap off at the scored line. I found using the tin snips on the track pieces worked well because there isn't the extra lip of metal on the inside edge that the studs have. Now that I have most of the pieces cut, I'm ready to start assembling everything together. I left a couple of the metal studs uncut just in case I messed up on a measurement or an amount. I'll start screwing in the seating area first, and then I'll move on to the barbecue walls. Once those are done and attached to the concrete, then I'll start assembling the fireplace structure. I still need to figure out what to do with the 2 pergola posts and how to add metal studs in that area, but I think once I have the walls up, I'll be able to come up with a good plan. So let's start. Screwing things together. So let's start screwing things together. I noticed a few variations with the metal studs, even though I purchased all of them from the same industrial material place. I asked for 20 gauge outdoor studs, but one looks more reflective than the other and doesn't have ridges on the outside corners. The numbers are the same except for one has a G60 and the other a G40. Doing some research on metal studs, it looks like they sold me some structural studs and some framing studs. Both should be fine for what I'm building. However, I did buy a couple of 20 gauge studs from a local home improvement store, and they were labeled as 20 gauge, but when I got home, they weren't nearly as thick as these. I took them back and let them know, so just be aware that there are a lot of variations beyond gauge thickness with metal studs. Make sure you're getting what you need. Another difference is when I started putting the walls together, the stud with the ridge keeps the studs closer together on a corner because there's a place for the screw to fit inside. This extra space that the screw needs is making gaps causing my wall to be too wide. When I put this all together, I'll remove the screws, then screw the two walls together, keeping the corner tight without gaps. To attach the wall to the slabs, I'm using these Tapcon concrete screw anchors. I've marked where to drill the holes in the track, spacing them every 16 inches. These screws require a 3/16 inch hole to be drilled into the concrete, so I purchased this new bit from my hammer drill. I'll also be applying some sealant under the track to help keep moisture out. Last chance to give this slab a good cleaning before I attach the walls. I marked the depth that I need to drill with a piece of tape. After drilling, use a vacuum or air compressor to clean out the holes. That's a bummer. Well, after breaking off a few of these screws, I figured I was doing something wrong. So I reread the directions, and it looks like I'm doing everything correctly. Drilling a 1/4 inch deeper than the screw using the proper size drill bit, and then cleaning out the hole with a compressed air or a vacuum. Then I read some of the small print. Minimum 1 inch anchor embedment required, maximum 2 inches. So I went onto the Tapcon website and found a more detailed installation guide. There's a chart showing you the proper size screw length to use for your application. Basically, these screws need to go into the concrete between 1 inch and 1 3/4 inches, not the 2 3/4 inches like I was trying to do. So I picked myself up the proper length and I'm ready to get these metal frames attached to the concrete. An impact driver could have been a better choice to prevent breaking the concrete anchors over the drill driver, but I didn't want to risk it, so I ended up using a socket wrench to tighten some of them. I have the outside walls attached to the concrete slab, as well as the back wall for the barbecue and the center wall here for the seating area. I still need to build the back wall for the fireplace support, as well as the 8 supports that will go in between these walls. Once those are all done, Then I can start working on the framing and the headers for the barbecue and the barbecue access doors. Most of the framing is finished for the fireplace area. I just need to build the actual support for the fireplace box, but I'll build that when I'm ready to put the box in place. I wanted to get the barbecue unit in place so I could check for clearances and to make sure that I have the proper spacing between the barbecue and the framing. I've been working on the framing for the access doors and barbecue. This header here is built with 2 metal studs attaching to the top track. Then a piece of track is used at the bottom with 90-degree bends put in the ends to attach to the vertical stud. Then another piece of track is used to frame out and support the bottom of the access door. I have all the pieces cut for the framing for the storage access door on this side. I still need to put the 90-degree bends in the track, so I'll show you how I do that, and then I'll get this all screwed together. Then I'll finish up the barbecue support and the framing for the storage access door. I started building the support, I just need to finish it up by adding in the second stud and the bottom piece of track. And then add in 2 short studs to frame out the opening for the access door. Once that is all done, I can start working on the structure that goes around the fireplace. So let me grab some tools and get to work. To make a structural header using metal framing, use both track and stud pieces. The studs are for strength and the track ties it all together. I have this track piece already cut to the proper length plus 7 inches to bend a 3.5 inch flange on each end, which will attach to a stud. Bending the track is the same process as cutting a piece, except you don't score the track with a utility knife. Mark both sides and the bottom of the track, then cut just the 2 sides. Once that is done, bend the track ends to 90 degrees. To help make a nice square bend, I like to clamp the track to the top of a stub wall using a piece of wood that fits inside the track. Lining up the mark on the bottom of the track with the corner of the wall. Then bend the track 90 degrees by hand and repeat the process for the other end. Here are my 2 track pieces that will frame out the storage door opening. To build the opening, I'll get 2 vertical studs in place, add in the 2 horizontal studs and track that create the header, then frame out the bottom with a couple of vertical studs to support the door opening. I'll get everything in place, held together with a couple of screws, check that the door fits, then add the rest of the screws. For the barbecue support, I didn't have a track piece long enough to fit the entire distance, so I ended up using 2 pieces of track to make the bottom of the header. In some ways this is easier because your measurements between the bends don't need to be exact. It's still plenty strong because the header gets its strength from the horizontal studs, not the track. Make sure that the door fits before adding in all the screws. Now, I can start building the structure around the fireplace. I cut the ends of the top track with a 45-degree angle, so I would have space to screw in the side curved track pieces. The rough opening for the fireplace needs to be a minimum of 44 1/8 high by 43 3/8 wide. I would build a header that is 43 3/8 wide and attach it to the side studs so the bottom of the header is just above 44 1/8. Here is the fireplace unit that we'll be installing. It'll basically be going right where I'm sitting. I have most of the structure pieces cut. I just don't have them screwed together yet because I want to get this box into this spot and check for some clearances. Everything looks good, then I'll start screwing all these pieces together around the fireplace. The platform for the fireplace is using 1/2-inch hardy board on top of some metal studs. And the manual for the fireplace says I can use plywood, but I wanted to use something that is fireproof as well as waterproof. I discovered that I made somewhat of a design flaw. The fireplace structure sits right on top of the lower support, which means there's nothing here to support the seating area. So I'm gonna have to build 3 more supports that will go along this edge. I did think about moving this lower support out 1.5 inches, but then I decided it would be easier just to build the 3 supports. However, I did move out the side supports 1.5 inches to give me something to support the concrete board. I'm gonna get this fireplace box moved in place. If everything looks good with the clearances, then I'll start screwing everything together, finishing up these supports, and then I can finish the top part and then the curved pieces that go on the sides. I need to add a piece of track on each side to support the corner. I'll install it down 1 inch to make room for the curved track piece. To do this, I cut a section out of the top of the track so it would fit over the stud. On the other end, I bent a corner flange like I would for a header. These magnetic welding squares work great at holding the pieces for me as I was attaching them together. For the section above the header, I didn't add the track piece to the top part of the header because I needed the track piece to hold the studs for the top section. Ideally, you'd want both, however, this isn't supporting much weight. To make the curved part of the structure, I bent a piece of steel tubing to use as a template. Since I was making 4 of these, I used a tape measure so I'd be consistent, marking the sides of a piece of track every 2.5 inches, spacing the marks out a bit on the ends. I cut both sides of the track at each mark with a pair of tin snips, then bent the track piece until it matched the curve of the steel tubing template. Repeating the process 3 more times. I need to trim the 2 studs on each side so the curved pieces will fit. With a little persuading and trimming, I was able to get the curved piece in and match the tube template. I marked down the distance from the end to each cut, that way the curved pieces will match. 3 more to go. I have the metal framing finished and I'm ready to start attaching the concrete board. I'll take on a quick tour and give you a close-up look at some of the framing. But before we go, if you've enjoyed this video at all, how about clicking on the thumbs up button for me? It should be right down over here. Alright, you ready? Come on. Here is the fireplace and barbecue structure. As you can see, I have the fireplace box in place, the 3 added supports for the seating area, and I have these 2 studs tied together with a scrap piece of metal. What I ended up doing around each post was attach a piece of track to the post as well as the walls, then added 2 horizontal studs to support the cement board. I added an extra horizontal stud on each side of the barbecue to help support the countertop. And I added a few more supports to help hold and shape the curved track. Here is a closer look at the header assembly above the access door. To attach the horizontal stud to the top track, I added a corner bracket that I cut from a scrap piece of stud. I also added a stucco drip screed at the bottom of the walls. This is where I used the piece of track on top of the header facing up to hold the studs. It's screwed down in 12 places, so it's not going anywhere. The structure is attached to the pergola crossbeam in a few places. I used a 2-inch piece of track to connect a horizontal stud to a vertical stud, near the top of the curved structure. This area was challenging to get it to all fit, but it came together nicely with a few special cuts and pieces. That's it. Be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you'll know when I upload new videos. The next step would be applying the concrete board to the metal studs and then applying the stucco. Now, if you want to see this entire backyard makeover project, check out this playlist. Oh, and I may do the concrete countertops before I apply the stucco. So we'll just have to wait and see how it all turns out.
I created fire.